Hello, boys and girls. I am Miss Becky. Each week, I'll be here to share encouraging and uplifting stories with you, just the way Miss Kathy would have wanted us to. Pete the Pest. Sammy Tan woke up with a frown on his face. Then he remembered, today is Sabbath. He hopped out of bed in a hurry to get ready. I like Sabbaths, Sammy thought as he dressed. Everything that is, except these Sabbath shoes. They give me a pain. Kind of like Pete, he thought, as he combed his straight black hair. Well, almost straight. There was one notch cut out where Pete had accidentally stuck his gum last week. Pete was a kid in Sammy's 4th grade class at school. They sat in the same math table. Pete was always teasing and pestering others during math. At least I don't have to put up with Pete the Pest today, he said out loud to no one. Good morning, Sammy, Grandmother said as he arrived in the kitchen. Would you like rice or cereal this morning? Cereal, please. Thanks, Grandmother. When they arrived at church a few minutes early, Sammy rushed down the hall to help Mrs. Shue set up the Sabbath School classroom. He opened the doors of the shoebox and saw her busily arranging chairs. Good morning, teacher. Can I help? Happy Sabbath, Sammy. Yes, you can, Mrs. Shue smiled and patted him on the back. Sammy smiled in return. Soon the other shoebox kids arrived, and Sabbath school began. At the end of the lesson, Mrs. Shue asked Maria, why did Joshua ask God to keep the sun still? So he could find and destroy the Canaanite soldiers, Maria answered. And why did Joshua want to do that, Sammy? Mrs. Shue asked. Because they were bad. No, because God told him to. That's right, Sammy. He was trying to do what God asked him to do, so God made it possible by keeping the sun from going down. What can that teach us, Jenny? Mrs. Shue asked. That God will do the same for us? Jenny wasn't sure. Mrs. Shue nodded, but Chris spoke up. Like if you have a test the next day in school, you can pray and ask God to keep the sun from coming up? Mrs. Shue smiled as everyone laughed. No, Chris, I mean that when God asks you to do something, He'll make it possible. He'll give you the power to do it. Can you think of any real things God might ask you to do today that would be hard for you to do? Dee Dee raised her hand. What about if God wanted you to be a missionary in another land and you were afraid to go? What if God wanted you to tell your neighbor about Jesus and you were afraid to? Willie added. What about if someone hits you? Doesn't Jesus say we should let them hit us again? Jenny questioned. Let's look it up and see what Jesus says about that. Jenny, would you read Matthew 5:39 for us? Mrs. Shue waited while Jenny found the verse. But I tell you, don't stand up against an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, then turn and let him slap the other cheek too. Jenny read carefully. It would be hard to do that. What does Jesus mean? Jesus is teaching us something very important. He says it in verse 44. But I tell you, love your enemies. Pray for those who hurt you. Mrs. Shue went on. When someone is mean to you, you should be kind to them. Could you do that without God's help? Sammy had to agree with his friends. No way. The next week in school, Sammy was reading through the instructions for the math assignment when he felt a sharp smack on his right ear. Ow! He cried, loud enough for everyone to hear, including Mrs. Peterson. Shh, she said quietly. Sammy, get busy with your work. Me? But she had already turned away to help Maria. Sammy muttered to himself. He turned to look at Pete. Pete was scratching at his blank paper as if he were working hard on the math problems. He glared at Pete, who looked up and stuck his tongue out at Sammy. Gotcha, Pete whispered. Sammy moaned and tried to ignore Pete. He didn't want to be in trouble with Mrs. Peterson again. Now, if I don't hurry, I won't get my math work done, Sammy thought. No wonder Pete gets such bad grades. He spends all his time pestering other people. Class, put your papers away. We will now have a surprise test, Mrs. Peterson said happily. The children all groaned. I'll write 10 problems on the board. You copy them onto your paper and figure out the answer for each. Be sure to show your work. Sammy snapped a new sheet from his notebook. He didn't worry much about math tests. He zipped through the first 9 problems, then stopped to glance around and see if anyone else was finished. He liked to be the first to hand in a math test. He turned his head and almost bumped into Pete's head. Pete was trying to look over his shoulder and copy his answers. Sammy frowned into Pete's eyes. Pete hung his head down until it rested on his paper. Sammy turned back to the last problem, but he was thinking about more than math. This is perfect, he thought. Now I can get back at Pete for being such a pest. I can tell Mrs. Peterson that Pete was trying to cheat. Sammy bit on his pencil as he thought, I wonder why Pete goofs off so much. He has time to do his work. He just wastes it and gets bad grades. Sammy looked up at the board for the next problem. But just then a new thought struck him so hard he nearly bit off his eraser. Hey, maybe Pete just doesn't understand how to do math. Maybe he's afraid to ask Mrs. Peterson for help. He looked over at Pete again. His head was still on his desk. I wonder if I should tell on him. New thoughts kept popping up in Sammy's brain. What would God want me to do? I know that Jesus said we should be nice to those who are mean, but he didn't have to put up with Pete. Pete deserves to be in trouble. He gets me in trouble all the time. Sammy closed his eyes for a moment and prayed. When he finished the last math problem, he took his paper to Mrs. Peterson's desk. Mrs. Peterson? Yes, Sammy. I'm afraid I need to tell you something about Pete. Yes? I don't think he understands our math problems today. Could I use my free time before recess to help him? Of course, Sammy. I'm very happy that you care enough to want to help Pete. I know he can be a pest. That's okay. I need help too sometimes. Sammy turned to go, but stopped suddenly. That's it, he said out loud. What's what, Sammy? Mrs. Peterson looked puzzled. I just saw a footprint, Sammy grinned. Not on the carpet, I hope. No, it was right across my brain. Sammy smiled at the look on Mrs. Peterson's face and walked back to his desk.
The story you have heard today is from the Shoebox Kids Bible Stories, written by Jerry D. Thomas and used with permission from the Pacific Press Publishing Association. If you're interested in any other books published by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, please visit AdventistBookCenter.com or call 1-800-765-6955.
This podcast is a production of the Carolina Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.